I would like to welcome Suli Breaks to this edition of the Gratiaen PODS, which is supported by the British Council. Suli is here in Sri Lanka to participate in the Ceylon Literary and Arts Festival, and he is a spoken word artist based in London, and is also the author of the book You Wish You Had Read Before Marriage, is a comedian, entrepreneur, and performer, and we're really, really happy to have you here, Suli. So I'd like to dive straight in to something you talked about at the Ceylon Literary and Arts Festival, which is that you consider yourself a spoken word artist, but not a poet. And I'd love to know what it is about the spoken word medium that enables you to tell the stories that you're trying to convey through your work, and why you feel like it necessitates differentiating it from poetry.
I think I'm a big believer in anything you do, you have to respect the craft of it, you know? So when I write fiction, like, you know, there's a craft to it. I had to do courses. I had to read about storytelling, you know, the hero's journey, the 3-act structure, all these things. And I think when it comes to poetry, there's a craft to poetry that if you're going to call yourself a poet, you should learn, and you know, and you should appreciate. Even if you're going to break the conventions of the craft, I think you should understand that. Whereas I think spoken word and what I do is a bit more free form, and it exists more in the realm of like the oral tradition of storytelling, you know. And I think I like to embrace that element more, and I'm more comfortable in that element rather than trying to like fit myself into the conventional poetry stereotype or archetype, etc. I think there's often be a stigma associated with spoken word, where people are like, it's not real poetry. And when I first started, to be honest, it kind of like, it didn't bother me, but it was something I was aware of, and I feel like it kind of positioned me away from certain opportunities. But I just learned to embrace it, because for me, the most important thing about whatever you're creating is that it reaches the person you're creating for, and it connects with that person. So I think it was always important for me to distinguish that if poetry's over here, I'm doing spoken word and I prefer doing it, and whoever it resonates with, that's more power to the art form, more power to me, and hopefully that's what matters the most.
Yeah, so it sounds like there's kind of maybe some barriers to positioning yourself as, you know, a fiction writer or as a poet, whereas spoken word incorporates all of those elements without making you feel like you have to conform to these styles, and you can just be a bit more creative and pull from here and there, right? Because I know your work also, when you put it on YouTube or different mediums, you also use music, and you know, so it's kind of drawing from all of these different mediums and genres, and I would love to know kind of what drew you to spoken word and how you were introduced to it.
Okay, yeah. I think you touched on an interesting point about the fusion of genres and mediums, and you know, and I think ultimately the most important thing is message. You know, the most important thing, like even when I self-published the book, it was kind of like I knew the kind of people I'm making it for. The book is it's like 60 pages long. You can read it in a day. That's very specific. We live in a TikTok generation, a very fast generation. So I think the most important thing for me has always been messaging. And I think very early on, when I started listening to like hip hop music, I was always obsessed with the message. Some people like the beat, some people like, you know, they like the fact that they can dance with it. But I was always just obsessed with the lyrics and the message behind it and the way people told stories within that medium. So when I was I think when I was about 16, I was doing my GCSEs. So it was the start of GCSEs. And, you know, and I've always listened to music, but in order to revise, because it was so kind of like monotonous, I just picked up a CD that my cousin had left. The CD had it was like back in the day, you used to bootleg, you know? You know, when you get the blank CD and you're not sure what you're in for. Yeah. And it was like, at that time, it was Jay-Z's album, The Blueprint. And it was such a pivotal moment for me, just because of where I was in my life, the kind of like coming of age, where I was living. And in that album, he kind of really just articulated the story of his environment, but also felt very similar to the environment I was in. And at the same time, he was kind of like giving a lot of guidance and wisdom, entrepreneurship, you know, women, relationships. You know, not everything was productive, but it was relatable.
Yeah.
You know, and I feel like at that point, I kind of fell in love with the idea of using lyrics. You know, up until that point, it'd always been stories that I'd read that really gave me that appreciation, novels and stuff. But hip hop and lyrics and rhyme and as a medium to really empower people, I think that was the pivotal moment for me.
Yeah, so spoken word being something that you can tell that story, but you also have these tools of rhythm, as you
Yeah.
said, rhyme and lyricism to kind of capture the audience,
Yeah.
right? And I think everyone really sees that in your work as well. I think everyone was
Thank
really
you.
captivated by your performance at the Ceylon Literary Festival. And I'd love to talk about the book and your kind of, I don't know if it's a pivot or if you've always, wanted to write, but, you've already written this book, The Book You Wish You Had Read Before Marriage, and you've mentioned that you're working on other publications, like a novel, but also putting your spoken word pieces into writing.
Yeah.
And I'd love to know kind of what that process looks like for you, how you're approaching it, but also what maybe changes about the way that you write a spoken word piece and now how you're shifting that to the page.
Yeah. I think for me, like my passion has always been to write. You know, when I started reading comic books, one of my first things was like, I want to make comics, but my parents were like, no. But but I was always that kid in English literature who would do their homework, which would be a story, and then the teacher would give me a grade, and I'd go home and improve it because I just loved it. Like I just loved telling. So me and my friends used to compete to be like, what did you get for this story? And I used to tell. I feel sorry for my English teachers because I used to tell the most random stories just out of context. For an English class, I talk about like fantasy, mystery and crime. Like when it's just GCSE English, they just want Mice of Men and Child. So I'd always had a passion to write, but I was always very aware that the environment I was in or the people I was around, that's not how they consumed information. It was very much like you say it to them directly, you perform it to them, they can respond. But most of my friends wouldn't necessarily pick up a book and read it unless it was like about like getting money or like something self-help or orientated, something that's very specific. So over the pandemic, I've always been in the background working. Fiction is like my passion. I've always been in the background writing, and over the pandemic, this book kind of like very much came out as an experiment. Over the pandemic, I started writing. My wife was like, you have a great way of communicating ideas that people find difficult. And she wanted me to write about like marriage just from a male's perspective. And I put it online on Twitter, and then I put it as a thread, and it just went crazy, it exploded, millions of impressions, everyone messaged me, etc., etc. And I started a newsletter. And I think one thing that's always been very key about my journey is I'm a creative entrepreneur. I think creativity and entrepreneurship is like a necessity, especially when you're kind of like doing it by yourself. So I was like, how do I take these newsletters and all these things that are very like transactional and transitionary online and make it into something tangible?
Yeah.
So this was a long process of like, I went to publishers as well, and publishers were interested, but I feel like traditional publishing just moves too slow. I just felt like the way it was and what I wanted to do, it just moves too slow. And we had conversations, and I was like, let me just try and do it myself. So this is just like the end result of a lot of experimentation. And once this kind of came to fruition and people were buying it, I was like, a light bulb kind of went off my head, and it was like, how do I create more things that are tangible? And I was like, all the spoken word pieces that I have online, people enjoy them and they like the message, but it only exists in that medium. So my thought process was like, how do I take it from the internet and put it into something tangible? Because now that I've proven that I can do it. So the goal is now, and we had this conversation yesterday, and you kind of just gave me the perfect words to articulate what I'm trying to do. So I can't steal it from you. But yeah, I'm trying to create little booklets where I kind of like have my spoken word pieces, but then annotate them and kind of like reinterpret them and give people a different way to appreciate them, but then they still have the words. So in that context, it's not poetry on a page. It's kind of like, these are like manifestos. These are my ideas, putting them out into the world. And there'll be like annotations or like essays explaining where these ideas came from, what they mean to me. And, people can take them away outside of, YouTube or the digital medium and kind of like hold them closer to their chest and do what they want with them. So that's a long way of saying that that's the process I'm in right now. So I think the production process is a new pivot, but I think the writing has always been like in my head, and I'm just finding the way to put that together now.
Yeah. And I also think it's so interesting, a book like this that was born on Twitter. Now the trend, or, the way the world works is people put their ideas out online, and then the print kind of becomes the end product. So it's still interesting that print form is still important in that process. And I'd love to know kind of what you feel. You said that it's something tangible.
Yeah.
And I'd love to know what your kind of relationship with that book form or this kind of, having something in your hands is.
Yeah. I mean, I could go on for days about like how I feel about publishing and how I think the importance. So what I feel, I feel like when I was young, there was, I was a nerd, but maybe that's it. But there was nothing more exciting like getting a new book and just like opening it and smelling the pages. You know what I mean? I feel like that was such a powerful experience. Yeah. Because there's so many different ways to consume media now. You have Netflix, you have Twitter, all this stuff. That experience is not necessarily the same. So I guess like, for me, it's important like to just have something, even if it's just on your shelf, that you can feel connected to in what quote unquote real life. This is who knows what Zuckerberg's gonna do, but real life still exists right now.
Yeah.
And I felt like getting a book should be that experience. So even at the moment, like, even though I've created this, I'm trying to think of more ways to make the experience of getting a book a lot more valuable. So like, for instance, I've printed a certain amount of copies of this book. Once those copies are done, I'm not going to sell anymore. The ebook and the audiobook will still be there, but I'm getting this one framed and I'm retiring it. So then people feel like they're really connected with something that has value.
Yeah.
I think books should have the same value that art has. When you have something on the wall and you're like, this, I have an emotion connected to this person's experience of creating this. And that's really where I really want, there's certain books that people buy just so they can have a second cover of it or a third cover, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I think I like that part of the experience, that I feel like we're losing it a bit as the way culture's progressing. And we're just like, books right now is like scan, swipe. And I'm trying to like change that a little bit, and there is like so much taboo associated with self-publishing. Yeah. And I say to any creatives or any writers listening, like, don't let an industry like dictate how your art is viewed. If somebody likes it, somebody likes it. You don't need to be published to be legitimate. Your movie doesn't need to be in the cinema to be good. If somebody likes it, focus on the person that likes what you're doing and make it for them and more of them. And, and we have the opportunity in the way the world is now. And I think it's very important that creatives and writers appreciate that opportunity we have.
Yeah, and I really resonate with what you say about, putting something out there, even if the kind of established industries and institutions don't deem it to be kind of worth their money and time, but that doesn't mean that, it isn't worth being out there. 100%. And then, as you said, clearly it resonates with people. You're here and everyone, talking about your work, and, and we shouldn't be limited by those institutions. But I also wanted to kind of ask you about, aside of your spoken word kind of craft, that is about the performance, right? And I know that you went viral and for your piece, Why I Hate School But Love Education, and it's been 12 years since that was, put online, but I don't know how long before you put it online you were performing it. And I'd love to know kind of about your relationship with that piece, and also how you feel performing it 12 years later, how that has changed for you, and just also about the kind of aspect of performance in your work and what that means to you and how you kind of craft that as well. Sorry, that was a lot of questions.
No, I completely get it. I mean, the hardest thing about that piece is me, my son is 7 now, is me listening to say every morning saying to me, oh, like, I don't want to go to school, Dad. I hate going to school, you know. And then I'm thinking, damn, there's going to be an age where he's going to be able to appreciate the things that like, I've written, and then that's going to be like his ultimate argument against me. You know what I mean? Say, you know, because I have, you know, because my friend, his oldest son, I've known him since he was 7. He's 18 now. He's applying for university. But prior to this, he was like, he used to message me all the time and be like, oh, I hate school, man. You get it, you get it, you get it. And his dad would be like to me, see, this is your fault. You know what I mean? But, you know, fortunately, he's applying for universities now. He's applying for like Cambridge, King's. He's going to study English. So he's progressed. But I feel like my hardest challenge is kind of like having to reinterpret that piece to like this generation and like let them really understand the message. Because like you said, right now, someone can cut 30 seconds of it and to them, that's the whole message. You don't have to watch the whole thing and get it in context anymore. Performance, for me, there was a point where it was like, super frustrating where it's like I'd go and I'd be like, I think when that piece went viral and people be like, we want this piece, we want this piece. And I was like, I have other pieces, you know what I mean? I got stuff I can perform, you know? But I think as the time has gone on, you've learned to, like I said, like I was saying this yesterday, you've learned to appreciate that you've created something that has like a long tail, that like 12 years later, someone can still watch it and it can still resonate. Like, that's the best feeling as a creative in this day and age as well, especially when it's like everything has gone like that, you know? And that for me is like, not validation, but it's kind of like there's a form of vindication around it to be like, yeah, I was talking, I don't know what age group this is for. I was talking that good stuff, basically. You know what I mean? So I think that is the experience. So when I do perform it, even though I forget some of the lines like half the time, every time I perform it, there's like a different version. If you put them all side by side, I'll be like, I forgot that line, he forgot that line, he forgot that one. But
that's amazing.
Yeah, and I have fun with that as well. Like sometimes I'll start from the end of it, or sometimes I'll start from the middle of it. Like I never, depending on how I feel, I never perform. But the idea of being able to like just go on stage and just have fun with it, I think that's a key part of performance. Like having a relationship with it rather than it becoming robotic and word for word. It gets really frustrating sometimes when you see, like you can see a great spoken word piece. Someone performs it for the first time, you see it and they're in tears and they break down and you're like, this is amazing. And then you see them perform it again and they have the exact same reaction in tears. And I'm like, wait, is this genuine or is this rehearsed? You know what I mean? Not saying that there's anything wrong with that, but I like the idea of spoken word feeling like I'm talking to you every time, not just regurgitating, not say regurgitating, but having like it being performed in all, I like that idea. And spoken word is a performance medium, but I like the idea of it feeling as authentic to me every single time. When it feels too rehearsed, sometimes it feels, you lose that a bit,
So I guess maybe like having to perform it, you have to find ways to keep engaging yourself in that material that might be from a time where you don't really relate to anymore, but you still have to find a meaning that kind of continues to resonate with you.
I mean, there's certain lines in that poem that don't even make sense anymore, so I just don't say them, you know what I mean? In terms of not make sense, but it's just like in terms of like, I would have phrased it better if I understood how to phrase, but so I don't even say them, but I just like, just work around it.
So you've kind of been improving it as you go.
And that's what I love about spoken word. I feel like poetry, once it's on the page, you have what's on the page. With spoken word, you have a bit of like...
you can create new versions of it every time, as you said. I want to kind of talk about maybe that piece a little bit more and, some of your other work as well, I know is very personal. And as you said, you're telling a story that's for you and authentic to you, but also you do touch on a lot of themes of kind of systematic inequality and, conflict and all of this and, the education system. And so I'd love to know how you feel about this kind of position that maybe you haven't necessarily put yourself in, but people see you as kind of this activist with or mentor, and this sense of responsibility that you have by putting work like that out there, and people receiving it like that. But then also, as you said, the very kind of personal storyteller, I'm telling you what I know and that's it kind of vibe, and what you're trying to do. I guess I'd love to know about that tension and where you see yourself in that.
It's interesting you asked that, because in 2016, I did like a headline show, you know what I mean? We had like 800 people there. It was in like London, and one of the theme of the show was called Not a Role Model. The whole thing was for me to position myself and be like, yo, I'm not trying to be like anybody's hero. I'm not trying to be anyone's activist. I'm just trying to say what is true to me. And I think just because the way the world is, very few people are direct with their opinion. Do you get what I'm saying? Like, your friend may come in with a new hat, they may walk in with a hat, and that may be the ugliest hat that I've ever seen. But everyone will be like, oh, I like the new look. I like, the moment you say, yo, that hat is ugly, you become controversial. You know what I mean? Even though everyone was thinking it. And I see art in the same way, where the moment you say what you directly think, there's going to be some people that disagree with it, and I think there's a lot of things that we repress as people, especially in like the system that we live in. I just feel like it's very unnatural to, like, just as a human, you know what I mean? Like, we have to pay tax, then what's that meme where it says we're the only species that pay to live on planet Earth, like, you know what I mean? It's unnatural to exist. So there's going to be a lot of issues that you have with this system, but most of us just go through it and, like, just get on with it. When you become a person that, like, doesn't challenge but articulates and highlights those things, automatically people resonate towards that voice, but also they want that voice to continue speaking on their behalf. And I think that's when you become an activist. But for me, I always make it clear that I just want to tell my truth. And if that encourages you to act on it, that's important. I'm acting on it. But if it encourages you, then power to you. If you just enjoy listening to it, power to you the same way. So even one of the reasons the marriage stuff resonates is because I'm writing from what I think is the unromanticized perspective of marriage. I'm writing from the reality of it. Not saying it's not great, but there's also this side that no one ever sells. And I think just finding a medium to translate that honesty, I think it quote unquote makes people feel like this is the person that's going to challenge this for me. But I'm not Mandela,
Yeah.
But I'm not going to go to prison 27 years for anybody, you know what I mean? But I'm just saying that, like, I do have strong opinions, and I think when you put them in a public forum, people want you to see you as that. And I don't mind if they see me as that, but the reality is, there's people out there that are really activists. There's people out there that are really sacrificing, and they deserve just as much or even more credit. I'm just writing and I'm just talking on stage.
Still important.
It is important, but
you're putting the ideas out there for someone else to run with.
For someone else to go and someone else to go and spend time in prison. You know what I mean?
How do you feel about kind of young spoken word artists who look up to you as a role model, even though you don't want to be seen as one?
No, I'll be honest with you. Like, I'm at the point in like of as a creative that is flattering in a way. When you're first starting out, you're competing with everybody. There's a lot of competition, you know what I mean? But I've learned that I'm only going to get better as an artist. I'm only going to get better as a business or as an individual when you collaborate with other people. So when young people come up to me and they see me, I'm always just like, so what have you got from me that I can learn from? What have you got that your generation or your upbringing has given you that I don't have? What perspective do you have that I can take? Like, I love the idea of, like, when young artists come up to me and they're like, I really like your stuff, and they'll be like, oh, listen to my stuff. I'll be honest with you, 80% of the time is really bad because they're young and they've got to work on it. Sorry. But in general, like, I like when I find, like, someone who's been inspired and they make something and I'm like, yo, like, that's crazy. Like, tell me how you did that. It's weird because when you do that to them, they're still in that competitive phase as well. So they're almost automatically defensive. They're like, what does he want? But I like the idea that, like, I've allowed other people to put their perspectives into the world creatively. You know, I like that idea. I don't think you have to do it like me or the way I do it, but I like that because then I can look at you and be like, what inspiration can I take from what you're doing? You know.
Do you see that kind of this spoken word form is continuing to resonate with people, and kind of I would love to know about, you know, as a kind of final question to wrap up our discussion before hopefully you'd give us a small taste of some of your work. Whether you see it kind of continuing to resonate with people, and also how you see that resonating maybe globally, and the differences or similarities in this form across the world, if you have experience with that.
Yeah, I think spoken word is a niche and probably will be a niche, but I think it's a great foundation for like I was watching, there was like an interview with like this rapper, you know, in the UK, and one of the things she was saying, she was like, I used to listen to a lot of my stuff, and then that gave her the foundation for how to write lyrics and create sounds and do all these kind of different things. And I think it will always be a great foundational art form to communicate ideas. Whether people do that and take it into film, or they take it into theatre, or they take it into like music, I think that's the great part of it. So I think it will always be there as a great foundation for creating and exploring like ideas. And I think around the world, what is interesting is that when I've traveled, I've seen the styles are always similar, but the messaging, you realize how different the messaging, especially for young people, you know, like I remember going to Trinidad, and one of the interesting things about we went to, it was like, I would say it was like a youth prison. And one of the interesting things that the young girls were talking about a lot was a lot about like AIDS and like teenage pregnancy. This was years ago, so I don't want to put a stigma to say that, but it was very interesting to me because in UK, what young people talk about is completely different. You know, we have different fights. So I think that was interesting. It made me see the art form as such a great way to touch on your environment and really make it personal to you in so many different ways.
Yeah.
So I think that's what I think is great about spoken word and the power of it.
That's amazing. Yeah, a way to channel all your complicated thoughts and feelings. And on that note, to wrap up, I would love if you could give us a little performance. Or
I will. I'm trying to remember the piece that I was thinking of the other day. Best friends don't always want what's best for you, especially when it means that you might be doing better than them. Because competition isn't always healthy. The same way love isn't always easy. Because what happens when the love of your life stops bringing love into your life? Couples turn to strangers when life doesn't go how they promised it would at the altar. Sometimes love can be painful. I remember when I went to my doctor in year 9, he said to me, I said to him, my knees hurt. And he said to me, it's because I was growing. Growth isn't always easy. The same way love isn't always perfect. As you get older, the more things that start to hurt. My back hurts, my knees hurt. The people I love have hurt me the most. And sometimes the people I don't love have treated me the best. But when life gets difficult, I always try to remember what my doctor told me when I was in year 9, that sometimes all this pain is a requirement for growth. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Suli, for coming here to the British Council and having a chat with me. It's been really incredible to talk to you. And I would also like to thank the British Council again for supporting this podcast, as well as John Keells Foundation, who are partners to the Gratiaen Trust. And again, thank you so much.
No problem. Pleasure's all mine. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.